Thanks, Marion. Okay, welcome everybody to another meeting of the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee. Let's dive in here. We've got enough people. So yeah, today is, I forget what we're calling it. We're checking in on our status of where we're at with our actions, revising the actions, I think is what we named this meeting. And I just wanted to provide some time to, well, I just want to keep momentum going for one thing, and wanted to provide some time in this agenda to check in. And I know it's like been a lot, and task groups are meeting, and there's a lot going on in a lot of different realms in the climate world. So I just want to take some time today to check in on things. We had a request for some input and feedback and volunteering of members for a couple of different initiatives from the Climate Action Office. So we'll check in on that. And then just hopefully provide plenty of time, and hopefully we have a few more people join us where we can have some more in-depth conversations about the actions and where our task groups are at, getting sort of detailed in those actions, but also kind of broadly looking back and seeing where we want to be as a subcommittee, so that those groups can plug into that in more direct ways. And then we'll take some public comment and recap. So any comments or input on the agenda? Anything else people want to talk about today? All right, we'll proceed with that then. And we do need to approve the September 13th meeting minutes, and I can probably
I'll move we do that.
Second.
Okay, I did just put them in the chat if anybody needs to take a look. Does anybody need to take a look and take a few minutes to do that? We can if we need to.
I am an extension since I wasn't there.
Okay. Where does that put us then for being able to approve those?
I could withdraw my motion and do another motion.
You still have your quorum. The abstention is a vote.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. So thanks for that. I didn't know. Okay, approve.
Sorry, I don't see my name in there. I attended the first hour.
Okay.
But if you want me to, I could reach out to, is it Liz? Just to say, I don't know who the right person is, but just to say that I was there and I intended to be in those minutes.
We can add that in, and we will.
Okay. Great.
So Sue can make that correction, or we can make that correction and make sure that it's reflected. And with that, we can take the motion. We can approve. I don't think we have to be all that formal with the motion in the second, but okay, approve everyone or not? Speak up if you don't approve. Thanks, Alice. Thank you, Bronwyn. Okay, then they are approved in a very funky fashion. Sorry about that. Okay, so moving on to our next agenda item is just Vermont Climate Council updates and subcommittee membership updates. Bronwyn, go ahead.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Whole meeting minutes approval thing is confusing. Generally agree, but then I forgot that if we can make a correction to the August 20th, I didn't think that they were approved in our last meeting, and I did have some corrections to make. So yep. I don't really care if it says they were approved here or not, but if we can go ahead and make those corrections to the August 20th minutes, that would be great.
Yeah, okay. I thought they had been made from the correspondence that you provided to those, and I thought that we did talk about what those changes would be generally at the last meeting and approve them based on that. So if folks agree with that, we'll kind of hold that and make sure that they are updated with your comment and consider them approved. That work for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Sue, you and I can work on updating both of those to add Dahlia to the September 13th, and then incorporate Bronwyn's comments that she outlined during our last meeting and then provided some follow-up on. Okay, thanks,
Okay.
Bronwyn. I don't have any Vermont Climate Council updates, nothing substantial. The Climate Council did meet earlier this week. A lot of what they went over, we have already reviewed in our subcommittee because the steering committee had already talked about that. So like the guiding principles, the outline for the climate action plan, they went over that, the outreach, the cross-cutting pathways, things that we have already touched base on here. So nothing really new to report there, unless anybody else has anything of note coming from the council. I don't know if anybody sat in the meeting or has anything to share with this group from what they have seen or heard. I think I will just put a plug in that they did spend some time at the council reviewing the quarterly, the outreach quarterly reports. I'm probably not naming those great, but there's outreach reports posted on the Climate Action webpage under resources, and I definitely encourage you all to take a look at those as we're developing revised actions, because it's, you know, we want to make sure that we're addressing what people are saying they want to see in the climate action plan or what their concerns are, and try to address those. So those reports are great for looking back at that and understanding where the public is. Of course, we'll hear more with our stakeholder engagement too, but thanks, Marion, for putting that out there, and that'll lead you to where those types of reports are posted. And it's just good to kind of check in on those. So for membership updates, I don't think we had any more people leave, move out of the country, or otherwise need to step down. But we do have Chris Campany, who probably many of you know from Chris Campany being involved in so many things and being a leader on a lot of fronts. So I'm excited for him to join our subcommittee. And I believe when I talked to him about task groups, he is the, I think he's called the executive director of the Wyndham Regional Planning Commission.
Correct.
Yeah. So he'll be a great addition to our group. And when I shared with him the task groups that we have, he said, I feel like I should be on all of them, but I can't be on all of them. So I think he is going to look to join in the community capacity and planning, which is definitely our most stacked task group, but I think that's okay. I want people to be where they feel like they can add the most value. And then, you know, the whole intent of these meetings is to hear back from those task groups and weigh in on the work of those other groups. So that's great. I don't know, Marion, go ahead.
I just thought it'd be helpful to remind folks. So Chris is he's a counselor joining the Climate Council. He's representing, he's joining as the seat that represents municipal governments. So it was the seat that Paula Melton previously joined. And then just a reminder for folks, because, you know, as Andrea gives updates from the council meetings, we do have other counselors on the call. So I encourage you all to give updates, but David Dean is a counselor. Eric Forend is a counselor as well. So those are the other two counselors, climate counselors that are on the subcommittee, and then Chris will join that as well. Just wanted to note that.
Yeah, thanks for making that connection. Okay, we're ahead of schedule. That's fun, especially since it's sunny and it's fall, and maybe we'll get out a little early. So the next agenda item, what'd you say, David?
And get out.
And
Outside.
get out. Yeah, definitely. So getting grounded. Yeah, I just, like I said earlier, I just wanted to provide an opportunity for us to kind of check back in on where we are. There's been a lot of documents and a lot of process and a lot of SharePoint conversation and access issues and all these different things. I know dealing with that while this isn't the primary focus of anyone's work can be a little distracting and confusing. And so I just wanted to provide some space to check in on that. And I'm working to bring up a PowerPoint slide for that. Oh my gosh, where is everyone? Okay. Let's see if I can share my screen here. Are you seeing my screen?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay.
Yeah, it's up.
It's not obvious. The little thing is not in the right place. I want to see all of you again on this screen. Okay, so I think this is where we want to start from. So yeah, just kind of checking in on where we're at. So we have these three sort of time frames and the different steps associated with them. This is coming from the subcommittee review, the updated guidance, that there's a link there too, and I can put it in the chat. But September into early October is this step 2, reviewing the strategies, and this is what the task groups have been working on. And so I just want to also remind you that I know some people have not been involved in a task group. So I want to make sure that if you haven't, please reach out to the task group leads of the one that you'd want to be on. Alice is overseeing the public health. Scott is overseeing community capacity and planning, and then Val is overseeing infrastructure and the built environment. So if you have interest in being on that and you're not yet on a task group, reach out to them so you can get plugged into their sort of meeting cadence and get caught up on what they've been working on over the past few weeks that we've been meeting as task groups. And then, yeah, step 3 is sort of where we're at now, assessing the gaps, refining the actions to fill those gaps. And I know that is a lot of work to go through. We've been using some tools to do that, and I can talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. And then as we move into October, the real major step is to conduct those stakeholder events that the Climate Action Office is going to support, and then also do outreach. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth later, about how we want to do that, if who we should talk to at the stakeholder, who we want to have into our subcommittee, or if you want to just do some outreach through your task groups too. We can get into that more later. And then into November and December is where we're really narrowing down the changes, finishing up those, and then prioritizing what actions this subcommittee wants to bring to the council and for consideration, the really high level ones that we really feel like need to have some action on and our top priority for the Climate Council to consider. So any steps, any questions on that? I have more detail on kind of where we are now, but high level, just checking in, like, are people, do you have any questions on that?
I have a quick one. Are the stakeholder events, are those open to public as well, or are those like more of a kind of closed environment just for stakeholders and subcommittee members?
So there's going to be specific people, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody has a different understanding, is that there will be specific invites, specific stakeholders that each subcommittee wants to hear from, 2 different meetings, and but they will be recorded and open to the public.
Got it. Thank you.
Alice?
I just got from Jane Lazorchak maybe it's an event, not a stakeholder thing. I'd have to find it again, but it looked like, I think it was maybe something happening at the State House lawn. And that one I had, to communicate what looks like public events to me. I sent it over to our town office, to our PZA, and just had them print it off and post it on the bulletin board at the town offices.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay? Let me
Yeah.
see if I find what it was. But
There's an event on the State House lawn next week that I'm aware of.
yes, that's the one.
The next Wednesday, like a drive and ride or something. event.
Something like that, right? So I kind of took it on myself to say, well, maybe as we get these things, we should all advertise them, just reading through if they're public or not. It sounded more like an event to me. I can also have my PZA post this, get more copies and post this when he's posting. We do 3 places posting for municipal committees, like planning commission, select board. He can also post, I think we post at the post office and at one of the well-read bulletin boards at our local grocery or town grocery lunch
Mhm.
place. So if that's okay, I can continue to do that.
Yeah, I think that's great to make sure that the public knows about any type of events that you're hearing about, for sure.
We can go to Front Porch Forum too, but I have to kind of revise the format a little.
Yeah, thanks. Marion, did you want to speak to this slide or do you want me to walk through it?
You can walk through it if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. This is just a little bit more detail and kind of getting into some of the documents and the methods and the process that we're all aiming to use as we do the work in the task groups and modify actions through the templates and all of that. So I hope that this is the path that the task groups are taking. We went through last meeting and the meeting before and decided definitively which task group would take each action. And so that is that there's a spreadsheet on that. And are you able to put those links in the chat, Marion, maybe as we're going? Do you have them at your fingertips? Just to remind people, we did bring it up last meeting too, but that has been finalized. So if people need to check back in on which task group is supposed to have which action, that's there. And then there's the guidance that I pulled that timeline from above that has all these steps and timeframes spelled out really clearly. And then it also has just some language of like what questions to be thinking about during those steps. And I find that really helpful when you're going into your task group meetings to kind of reference and say, oh yeah, we should be thinking about that. Not just looking at the spreadsheet sort of cold each time, but sort of spending like literally 5 minutes just to look back at that guidance before a task group meeting and thinking about what you should be considering as we move forward on these revisions. We will have some time in our next meeting to go through the guiding principles for a just transition. There's a couple of documents on that on the resources page as well. And most recently is this link here. That's a visual guide for applying the just transitions, which I think is really helpful because it's a lot. And we will, like I said, in the next meeting, spend some time kind of digging into that guidance. And I've got to work with Danielle a little bit on how much we can do with that. But I'm hoping that we can take some of the recommendations that are fairly well baked and work to apply these guiding principles just to show people how to do that. So that'll be next meeting. But it's definitely good to just kind of look at that visual guide and understand what's in it as we're revising the actions as well. And then all that work is to be done in these spreadsheet templates that the Climate Action Office has provided to each task group. Those have a sheet with kind of all the actions and the responsibilities and the status. they have a simplified version of that. And then at least the task group that I'm working in, I'm not sure if all the task groups do, have just the task that task group is working on to formulate the revisions needed. So that's on the SharePoint site, which was, I know, a challenge for a lot of people to access, especially if you were outside of state government with your partner email addresses. It sounds like there seems to be the idea that those issues have been resolved and people should be able to access them, but just wanted to provide this space we can open up any of those right now. We can go into the SharePoint. We can look at the guiding principles together if people want to. Just anything that seems overwhelming or confusing to you, now we can just spend some time to go through that and make sure we're all grounded and where we're starting from for this work. Thanks for putting all that in the chat, Marianne. Go ahead, Bronwyn.
In the last full subcommittee meeting, I think it sounded like we were kind of going back to the drawing board on where housing actions were falling. Should probably go back and check minutes, but I recall having a discussion about putting housing, not creating a separate subgroup to tackle that, but kind of splitting it up, putting some of that into the infrastructure group. But if I recall correctly, at the last full subcommittee meeting, it sounded like that may not be in their purview anymore. Do we have a sense of where that stuff is going to land? Because I know that I'll be looking at the housing actions that are in our community capacity group. And if those aren't going to land anywhere, then I would prefer to pull them back in and just do it all together. I don't want them to get completely lost and forgotten in the sort of between subcommittee purgatory.
Yeah, I don't feel like anything should be in purgatory right now because we have those sort of assignments. But we definitely did have a discussion about housing and where that, how that should formulate some of the work that we're doing. We can, if it's helpful, we can open that up and look at some of the specific actions that you were talking about. Nothing should be left untouched. Every action that we had should be being reviewed.
Okay.
So do you think it would be helpful to open that up and kind of dig through it? Or did you have
not here, maybe
okay.
just clarifying from the last RRA, like that, and maybe it's just clarification for me, just knowing that either those housing actions are staying in that subcommittee and they are going to be tackling them, or they're recommending that they come back over to our committee. And again, just want to get a head start on that, because if I'm going to be doing all of them, I just want to be doing all of them together rather than getting sprung with it last minute.
Yeah. We can maybe come back to that when we're having the task group discussion too, and might give somebody a second to look through there and see if we can be more clear on where we landed with that. Because yeah, we definitely don't want to leave anything not reviewed or not addressed. My recollection was they were going to go to community, but I might not be thinking of the exact same thing you are.
Can I jump in, Andrea? I just pulled up the action assignment document, and we did, when we went through it last meeting, all of pathway 5, which is sort of the pathway from the last cap that had all of the housing actions. Community capacity and planning as the primary task group tackling that. I think we noted in consultation with other task groups, but that task group would take the lead on all of those actions. So I don't know if that helps clarify, Bronwyn.
Okay.
I don't think we weren't, it looks like we didn't plan on splitting any of that up among other task groups.
Okay, thanks.
Alice?
Yeah, Bronwyn. I'm working on housing in two areas. One, it's now come up, and when we did talk about it in the public health task force. And there's probably, I don't think it's I think there's some cross-cutting or sharing opportunities here with concerns in public health and housing and health concerns. With housing that's up now, to housing that has been flooded and people coming back, mold, et cetera. Those are all housing health issues also. But the other thing is Ben Rose at our last meeting brought up some housing issues, and I followed up with him on them. And there are some good points there that I think you and I should talk about. Again, they could be cross-cutting in terms of maybe public health task force being a bit consultative for you. And I'm also working on this, say that because I'm working on this also in the Central Vermont Planning Commission regional plan. We're working on them in housing, and we're taking up land use planning and housing in our new regional plan at our next meeting. So I'd love to talk to you on it and see, just kind of share ideas, if that works for you.
So I think this is great conversation, but I kind of want to refocus just on the slide that's up right now and just see if there's, because we're going to talk about task group stuff and content a lot later, and want to have a lot of space to do that. But like mechanic wise, process wise, that's where we're at in this conversation right now. And I just want to make sure that everybody feels sort of comfortable with all of that before we move on. Caroline?
Great question. So should I talk about my ideas about integrating SHIMP actions now or later?
Ideas on what?
Just really quickly. So as I was trying to update some of the actions that were allocated to me in our working group, trying to reconnect them to how they were revised in our 2023 SHIMP, and that process, I just wanted to bring that up really quickly with the group. Is there time for me to speak to that really quickly?
Yeah.
So it's not easy to do this, and I was struggling with how to talk about this. And Marion and I talked about it really, really briefly. But so when actions were integrated into the original CAP, a lot of them were taken in from the 2018 State Hazard Mitigation Plan. And then again, when the 2023 State Hazard Mitigation Plan was updated, a lot of those CAP actions had revised language and are now in the 2023 plan is slightly different. So one example was increase and create a permanent state fund for design and implementation of the local and regional climate adaptation resilience projects. That was originally in the CAP, but in the SHIMP, we updated it to say something slightly different. So in those instances, I'm wondering like what I can do to support folks in figuring out how they've been revised so that the plans are using the same language, so that all of the work that a lot of the people here did to put into the State Hazard Mitigation Plan is not lost in this update. What I was thinking is maybe just sharing again our shrimp mitigation action strategy so people can try to do keyword searches to see if it's there. But in this CAP update, I think it'll be really helpful if we're noting what is coming from the state hazard mitigation plan or what was also spoken about there, so that when we do the update again, it's easier to track. So does that make sense? Are you tracking? Do people have any thoughts on what I'm talking about? Would it be helpful if I share our mitigation strategy from the state hazard mitigation plan?
Are you meaning share it here now to get into, or just
No,
share?
I don't think we should get
some-
into it at all.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share it more as a resource, as something that people should be referring to get the most updated language, because if you're proposing that an action be revised, it may have already been revised when we updated the SHIMP and that was approved in November of 2023. So you can just kind of grab some of that language. And then again, for some of the working groups that are coming up with new actions, you might already have those actions that you're looking for in the SHIMP, and you can just grab them and pull them over. So it's a great resource for ideas, and plans should really be speaking with each other.
I think that's a great idea, and it would be great to post that on the SharePoint so people can access it also. But Marion, go ahead.
That's what I was going to say, is we should put that on the SharePoint site. Again, if folks are able to access it, we can kind of drop all of the links that I put in the chat to documents, and Caroline, the SHIMP actions into that reference documents folder. And then I wondered too about if folks are using the action, spreadsheets that are in there, we could also, meaning like you and me, could go through and we could just highlight any actions that were carried over. So it's sort of a quick reference as folks are revising to, if it's highlighted or kind of noted in some way, to go and check the SHIMP action document. And hopefully that wouldn't take too long to do.
I regret that I didn't fully think about this before people had dived into these, but okay. I think that we can try to
time
correct some of that and be a good resource. So
yeah, no, it's great to make sure that we're coordinated with that. Definitely. Alice, go ahead.
Yeah, Carolyn, when we meet on Monday, the things you just spoke about, the SHIMP, that's exactly the area that I had some questions on, based on a project here in Waitsfield. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Okay, great. I'll see you Monday.
Good. Is everybody from outside of, is everybody able to get onto the SharePoint now? If not, I can, at least connect you with the right people to work that out. All right, that's great, because there's a lot in there already, and we can try to maybe organize that documents section a little bit more too, because there's kind of a lot in there. Okay, so let's move on then. Make sure I'm on the right screen here. Okay, so I sent out a survey. Thank you for those who were able to complete it. We had quite a few respondents, and one of the questions on there was about this cross-cutting pathways that the Climate Action Office was looking for input on. They had a proposal to modify what was in the original CAP for what will be in the next iteration, cutting out some of the ones that sort of have already been accomplished, or moving some into a subcommittee rather than having it be cross-cutting. But these three remained. It was education, workforce development, and compact settlement. And so they were looking for volunteers from each drafting subcommittee, at least one per subcommittee per pathway. And so there's a little bit of a description there about what that would entail. And I provided that in the survey, and then folks provided their availability, and I could certainly appreciate the desire to want to help on these and not have the capacity to. But thank you to Alice for volunteering to be part of the education pathways. And then Candace, who's I guess not here today, but for workforce development, and then Bronwyn and Eric on compact settlement. So I was glad to see that we had representation on each one, and appreciate you all finding the time and the capacity to help out with those cross-cutting pathways, because they are important. And, you know, we've talked a lot about what cross-cutting pathways are. There's these that have been defined. We have our whole pathway 3 or 16, whichever way you want to look at it, that Scott is coordinating with the cross-sector subcommittee on also. And then we've talked a lot about the crossover even within our own task groups. So just the need for a lot of coordination as we move forward, and appreciate all that happening. Any questions on the cross-cutting pathways? That's really all I had to share on that. Okay. I'm sure we'll see more about those at steering committees meetings and in different places. So you can stay tuned on what's happening with those through that too. And I'll try to bring that back to this group so we just stay plugged into the overall picture. The other thing on the survey was stakeholder engagement. And we need to provide to the Climate Council today which groups we want to engage. Each subcommittee is supposed to pick 2 groups for formal stakeholder meetings. We kind of need to decide when we think at least some of us would be able to participate in those stakeholder meetings, looking at, I think, the last week in October and the first week or 2 in November. And it would be good to have as many of our subcommittee members available for those so that we can glean what we need to from those participating. So we just need to decide which groups those are going to be. And Scott had provided some recommendations in an email back to the group, I think, or at least some people in the group, and Otis provided some input. And so I put those as choices in the survey and left some space for other. And this is sort of the result. So clearly, regional navigators and state employees were the top people. And then the others, you can see some of the notes that people put in there. So I think there's some overlap with other and some of those groups. Bronwyn, I wasn't sure if you meant other or if you were providing more detail on the groups that you thought we should talk to. Those first 2 comments are from you. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about that, but just sort of getting specific and where'd it go? I might have to take some notes outside. I was thinking maybe I could modify that in real time, but I can take some notes on the side of who we think specifically, maybe start generally what our stakeholder group should be, and then get a little bit more specific about who we would want to invite to those. And then, you know, thinking those are the stakeholder groups, who do we potentially want to invite to come to speak to the whole subcommittee outside of that? And then maybe there's some groups that are a little bit more focused to a particular task group, and we can put them into that. So I'm hoping that we can narrow that down through conversation right now. I should mention too that in the correspondence from the Climate Action Office, there was mention that there will be 2 separate stakeholder groups that are led in partnership with the RPCs. So that's something to consider as well. And I don't have detail on that, but maybe others do. Marion, go ahead.
I'll just throw out, I selected regional navigators, but my thought in sort of interpreting that was that it sort of covered, I think, what sounds like it's Bronwyn's first bullet there around organizations that provide support to municipalities and sort of other geographies. So the RPCs, VLCT, the folks that do the Municipal Technical Assistance Program. I think long-term recovery groups and community resilience organizations could sort of be grouped under volunteer response organizations, but well, maybe that's separate, that's more recovery. But anyway, I kind of think that if be curious to hear other people who selected regional navigators, what you were thinking with that. But in my mind, it sort of gets to that first bullet under other. So I think my suggestion would be to kind of group that and call that one event, one group of stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
I just have a quick question. Can someone sort of define regional navigators? For me, I'm not sure that it's not a term I'm familiar with in the Northeast Kingdom. I mean, I know we have our RPC people who do a lot.
I don't think it was
Also-
defined, and that's why I'm saying it was sort of like, I just selected it based on my own interpretation of it. I think whoever wrote it, it was regional navigators was like organizations that provide support at a regional level outside of RPCs, so in addition to RPCs, but
Yeah,
anyway,
my
so I
thinking, my
don't
thinking
think
on
there
that
is a
was,
definition.
that was a goal. That was something we were hoping for, but I don't think it came into existence.
David, did you have something to add there?
Well, no, they haven't come into existence, and I considered that to be a goal. That in fact we do establish organizations other than the RPCs. In my area, it would be a group like the Connecticut River Conservancy, who could handle the entire river in terms of its bordering Vermont, as opposed to 4 regional planning commissions, including yours up in the kingdom, not in competition, but in support for each other. But I don't see the regional planning commissions having the wherewithal or even the desire to be the ultimate purveyor of assistance for resilience.
Thank you. Would a different name for regional navigator help? Because it's almost like those are, I mean, what you say makes total sense, David, and especially the example you give. So, I'm just thinking the Memphremagog Watershed Alliance,
Right,
or
exactly.
I don't know what you want to call those, environmental organizations that are doing various kinds of mitigation. I don't know.
Well, but then there are transportation organizations.
Yes.
I don't want to put necessarily an activity descriptor on
Good
it.
point.
Whether it's transportation or environment or whatever, they should be eligible and engaged in supporting local municipal activities. So
Otis, go ahead. Thank you for
I'm
raising your
sorry, I
hand.
don't have a suggestion.
I was gonna call on Otis, and I think what Otis is gonna say is gonna relate to what Bronwyn could say. Go ahead, Otis.
Yeah, I'll definitely let Bronwyn hop in soon, because I think I'm pretty sure this came from my response to the email chain on this. And my angle on it at least comes out of conversations at the community capacity task group. So totally understand that not everyone was there for those. And there are a number of existing actions that we're looking at that talk about creating regional navigator positions. I think the current actions only mention RPCs, but a conversation we had that, again, I think Bronwyn sort of was helping drive was, hey, there are other organizations, like you all are saying, that could also fulfill this role and potentially better. And so, yeah, I think as we were selecting that, I think we're all thinking about it in generally the same terms as having a stakeholder meeting with those groups that could fulfill this role that's currently called out in some of the actions to support municipalities in getting a lot of this work done, or understanding the various programs that are out there. So that's I think the background conversation that, again, I totally understand not everyone was there for behind that group.
Thanks. Go ahead, Bronwyn.
Yeah, just to add that, even if, so yes, the organizations that I listed were the ones that I was thinking of fill that role that Marion just described as what she was thinking around regional navigators. And even if these organizations that are listed are not necessarily filling all of the gaps that we may identify, I think they're the right group of people to bring in to talk about what it's like to try and work on municipal capacity building. I think some of the other more specific groups, like the transportation focused groups, watershed focused groups, I think, also are doing some capacity building in those specific sectors. But these groups are sort of providing more general support to municipalities for a whole host of topics and sectors. So I think if that's what we're trying to get at, is like who's out there doing this work already to provide capacity to communities, this would be a group that is pretty comprehensive in those roles.
Could you offer an example of,
right here, right?
of a group that,
Am I sharing my screen?
Yes.
I can see it.
Those are the examples of the groups,
So
right?
like the Vermont Council on Rural Development, their whole job is to go into communities and have community supported conversations around, you know,
right,
for the community issues that they want to address. I forget what the term is called, but so they're going into communities and really going in at that sort of foundational level to build some community capacity around a specific issue that the community is interested in.
yeah, I've used them as an example in some previous conversations. Yeah, exactly.
And do we want to consider whether these are like planning support or recovery support or both? Maybe they're the same people.
Well, I go further than that. I see hands-on. Groups like the White River Partnership and the Connecticut River Conservancy and the Memphremagog Watershed Association, they do hands-on work as well as planning, capacity, and technical assistance. They do hands-on work and get things done.
Okay. Any thoughts before we go to the hands that are up? Any thoughts on that and like logistically inviting those different types of organizations? I don't know them really well, so I'm looking for you guys to provide that input of, is that an unwieldy group because it's too broad, or is it right on because it has to be broad?
I think it's good the way it is. And I think if we try to sort of split hairs about which group is really active right now and which group is doing resilience versus mitigation, I don't think it's a good strategy, because a lot of these groups they're sort of project based and they seek grant funding, and they can change their focus, you know, within a couple of years, depending on what they're able to do. They're quite what do you call that when they're
Agile, flexible.
Agile, yeah. Thank you, Andrea. So I think leaving it wide open, fairly broad, is the best solution.
Okay. I don't know who had their hand up first, but I'll just go with Alice because she's first on my screen.
I'm going to put some caveats and some problems I see with item 1 there, and talking about all these, what I'd call kind of quasi-governmental or more community-based and created groups that do very good work. VLCT, as I was just looking at their new action plan for the year coming up, I looked at it and said, it's very, very light on flood mitigation, identifying flood resources. I thought it was very light on it. They are more of a policy creating group, and a guide for legal and policy information and explaining state regulatory things. One of the things I think should be added in there are emergency management, staff, emergency management, local emergency management in municipalities. We're having this issue right now where there are some groups that, yes, are seeing a need, but really don't understand the role of emergency management and the regulatory requirements of emergency management. Each town has what's called a local emergency management plan. And we work very well with organizations that supplement this, but there are state regulations on how emergency management works. And we did have problems in Waitsfield, in the valley, during Tropical Storm Irene recovery, where there were many people in good-hearted ways jumped into, well, we want to make an organization of volunteers for recovery. We want to make an outreach of all these people. And emergency management already had one. And there was a program and a site and a managed recovery. People need training on this. There are hazards to be considered. And when you get into a database of 256 names, it's very hard to manage your volunteers safely. So we have an ordinance that was created in the town of Waitsfield, identifying our emergency management director as the source for recovery and for volunteer training and support. I'm not quite sure what else to say other than I would get emergency management in this mix here, because we're already talking about, and I've put even into public health, training needed for emergency management in municipalities and for health officer training. There's a lack there, and we should be working together. And I believe that it just needs support. Perhaps it needs some funding from the municipalities, but there shouldn't be somebody trying to fill a void either. And I think the RPCs, when I look at mine, Central Vermont Planning District, yeah, I think they can be involved in whatever capacity they have right now, especially since we're doing a lot of flood and disaster mitigation that will flow through the entire new regional plan. And especially in the housing chapter that we're working on next week. So I'd like to see it as a outreach and an assistance that is, well, I can give you an example here. We have a community organization here that deals with the rivers, and they said, well, we'd like to do a multiple town emergency management hub or program. And we've thought about it too. However, that has never been done. And there's state regulations to look at in how emergency management needs to be conducted in municipalities. And it would have to get the approval of state and I think Vermont Emergency Management. And it would have to be done with an understanding of how it can be done. So, that immediately kind of starts the conversation off oddly, I think. And as far as the water and all, I mean, the RPC groups like the Winooski Basin Water Plan and also the Clean Water Action Commission also do a lot of work with RPCs on these issues.
And that sounds more like a group that David had been referencing and too. So I think what we're going to need to do is sort of like define these sort of broader groups and then work with the Climate Action Office to provide some specific contacts and actual organizations, and maybe get some guidance on them on how broad that can be, because I'm a little worried that it's going to be like 1,000 people. So I saw that Caroline, you had your hand up, but it went down. So do
Yeah.
you?
I mean, I was just gonna say that I think that the long-term recovery groups might have come from me. I don't know if other people said that, but I was thinking that from the perspective of more individual systems, because I'm pretty sure we had an action that was more about like case management and individual assistance gaps. And maybe the long-term recovery group / AHS might be able to speak to some of those issues and people might want to hear from them, but that was it. I think the list is fine how it is.
Okay. Marion?
Yeah, I think there's like a long list here already, and just want to remind, like this is for one meeting that will probably last an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And so I think we need to put, like, appreciate all the big, I think we need to put some parameters on it and wonder if, working backwards too about sort of what input we're trying to get information on, and then decide who to invite to it. I think to Otis's point earlier, and I fully agree with that, and I think Bronwyn was in support of that too, was from the Community Capacity and Planning Task Group. We were really interested. We have a number of actions that we're revising and are really interested in hearing from these types of organizations that sort of provide broad capacity building support. So not just the sort of sector targeted specific like watershed groups, but really, as Bronwyn indicated, like the Vermont Council on Rural Development, the regional planning commissions that help support emergency management and hazard mitigation planning and transportation planning, and sort of this more broader look at sort of how we help build community capacity for the planning work that's needed. And I think there's an hour worth of conversation to have there. So I think we're thinking about how we really target, we have 2 events and how we're trying to target that based on the outcomes and information we're trying to get. And then to Caroline's point, just want to say, like, it sounds like the second stakeholder group that folks were in favor of were sort of state employees. And so that might be a place to get the response focused DEM staff and AHS and others engaged in that conversation. So, yeah.
Thanks. I have the same concern of it being too broad. We'd like to talk to everybody. We're not going to be able to. So go ahead, Anne.
Thanks. I can appreciate your point, Alice, about needing to reach all the emergency management folks. That's not as easy as we would hope. For example, right at this very moment, I could be in a Zoom with the emergency managers in the Northeast Kingdom, headed up by our emergency planner. But most of the people who go to those meetings, it's very few select board members. It's very few emergency managers, because they're often a volunteer firefighter who has a full-time job. So it's very much catch as catch can. And I think the way to focus is not worry about that too much for this effort here, where we're just trying to make sure that people attend our short meetings, as Marion pointed out. And I mean, we have the capable hands of we have the capable leadership of the VEM people who are involved in this group, who can help, get the word out and help support the need for more training, as Ben is mentioning. Thanks.
So I can recap that maybe I'm hearing that we focus it more on those groups that may do both planning and recovery, but more on the community capacity planning side of things. And I don't know about how that fits into that. And we need to move on from this conversation. We can't spend that much time figuring this out. We still need to name the second group and go through that. So David, go ahead.
Thank you. My concern through whenever this conversation has come up is that we stop at the level of assisting municipalities. And the fact is that groups like the White River Partnership, the Lake Champlain Committee, Connecticut River Conservancy, Medford-Magog Watershed Association gets to the individual. In fact, CRC has a 4-state grant from USDA to help individual landowners with erosion problems created both by high water events and bad land use practices. And those organizations that have that outreach capacity to assist the individual, not the institution, but the individual, have to be at that table as we're figuring out how we want to move forward. And I'm putting that forward as an argument, and nothing that I say is pejorative, negative, or critical of regional planning commissions or other organizations like that, NRCD, in fact, because they work through municipalities, but none of them get down to hand-holding the individual to address flood and or climate change problems on their property. And those are the groups that I want to make sure get invited. I'm not looking for a cast of thousands. There aren't that many in the entire state of Vermont. In fact, I think I named all but 2 in my comments.
Okay. Thanks. I think we should talk about that more. Alice, go ahead, if you can, real quickly, so we can move on to the second group too.
Yeah, very quickly. One, it was emergency management who addressed a flood area in Waitsfield. There were a group of people that really felt that they were out. And they were very happy in the resources we got to them. Was in our purview to get FEMA to them as soon as FEMA arrived, and to get them the information on all the grants that they could apply to. So that's a very huge role that the emergency management plans. Now, we're a pretty well organized emergency management team in Waitsfield, but our frustration is getting local government, like the select board, planning commission, etc., to really understand emergency management and understand our needs, and stop just the process of, yep, sign that, LEMP, whatever, sign that, and then never really understand what emergency management involves. Many towns don't have a health officer or an emergency management officer. And for that, this comes under the training and education area.
Yeah, so that, I think what you're speaking to now is definitely important and content wise for what the task group should be considering for these stakeholder groups. Do we feel okay with what's here? I don't know. We wouldn't say municipal, but how are folks feeling about David's comments on, I don't know how to frame that, individual assistance on the ground groups?
That feels like a different topic. So I guess
I
appreciate that, David, but I think the idea and the proposal here was really to focus on organizations that support municipalities in doing planning and implementation, and hear you that there's sort of other organizations that help support the individual, but that feels like if we're pulling all those people into one meeting, those feels like 2 different topics, and I don't think that we would get the outcomes we would want out of that conversation.
So is there a place
when
to
does that
hold...
conversation happen?
Well, I would throw back to you, are there actions?
This is the only forum that I've bumped into in this process where you're going to have the people that are making resources available, including technology. And I don't know of another forum where it's going to happen. I mean,
So
CRC and the other groups that I know of are out there doing this on their own. And
you can think about having them as another stakeholder group if we wanted to. We got state employees responsible for implementing the CAP, really high scoring too. We could have that as a second group. We could do some other outreach at the subcommittee level to different groups. We could invite some people into our subcommittee. We can invite people into task groups. We can do outreach some other way if we want to hear from other groups. It's just for these stakeholder groups, keeping the conversation fairly focused is probably going to be to our advantage. But we shouldn't let those other groups slide. We should think about other ways to receive input from them. Go ahead, Bronwyn. You're muted.
I was just about to lower my hand because I'm not sure what I was going to say was going to be helpful, but I think maybe if, you know, I can see a value to including some groups that are really seeing how things pan out on the ground. I think it puts the onus on us to, one, keep that list very managed, because, you know, when I think about how many groups there are across the entire state of Vermont, that list could get very long. Also would need to make sure that our conversation is very clear that we are looking for feedback on the recommendations that we have. So whoever's invited to that meeting, we just need to set them up very well so that they can be responding in that way. The groups that are here, I think, are able to respond to the questions that we have around the actions that we're discussing. But if we want to include other more direct service, you know, individual assistance, I think we have to remind ourselves that we're focused on community capacity, not necessarily individual capacity. So we'd have to be able to translate any kind of anecdotal stories or feedback about individual capacity into those actions and into that. So maybe the best way to move forward from here is to start with the list that's there in the bullet, and then brainstorm, you know, put down on a piece of paper all of the other organizations that folks think are going to be able to weigh in on community capacity and their ability to take climate action, and then sort of refine a list from there. But generally agree that this is one group of people that we would like to have. And I would perhaps strongly advocate around using our 2 stakeholder meetings to do one group that's, you know, the list that's here, and then another group that's a list of more direct assistance on the ground providers.
For our 2 stakeholder groups, is that what I just heard you say? One for munis and one for individuals, or?
No, I'm saying I would not recommend doing that, because then that's it. That's all we've got, right? Is the RPCs, VLCT, VRC, VCRD, the entities that provide statewide municipal assistance for all of those subjects. And then our other group is a more boots on the ground that's very specific to individual assistance. And then that's all we'll get. And we'll, you know, there's a lot of other things here. So I'm saying if that's really important, let's combine those into 2 for now, come up with that long list. We've got RPCs, VLCT, VCRD, VCF, add, you know, David, Alice, add those other groups that you're talking about, and let's build out that list and just see what we're working with. And if it seems unmanageable, if we've got 100 organizations on that list, then we're going to have to, you know, we're going to have to come back to this conversation and try and whittle that down so that the conversation remains manageable. But I don't think that splitting it up into 2 separate stakeholder groups and that's it for our stakeholder groups is a good move.
I think there's other ways to reach out. Let's move on to who the second group should be. Can we do that?
Yes.
Okay. Clearly from this, it's state employees. I was surprised at that because I feel like we have a lot of state employees here. Obviously, there's a lot of actions and there's a lot of other state employees that are involved.
Yeah.
But I'll just put it out there. I was surprised by that.
Yeah, I was too, and I'm curious, like, we haven't really talked about this yet, but one of the things that I think we as the task, like the subcommittee, are supposed to do is kind of reach out to implementers of action as we're defining and revising actions. And like 98% of the implementers for actions from the 2021 CAP were state agencies. And so I feel like that those conversations will happen separate from this sort of stakeholder meeting, and think if we pull state agencies together, AOT and, you know, DEC and FPR and all of these others, it's going to be a wide conversation and we're not going to get a lot of targeted feedback on specific actions. But I don't know, 7 people said that that's what they wanted. So I'd be curious, maybe there's a way to kind of answer some of those questions.
Agreed.
Well, aren't we carrying a plan into the meeting and asking for feedback and sort of a gap analysis in terms of providing the services needed. I mean, I didn't think it was, we're going into a meeting with a blank chalkboard and we're going to write down every idea that comes into people's heads.
No, I think the intent is to describe, obviously give some, most people will be quite familiar with what was in the original action plan.
Right.
So just sort of grounding them in that again, and then talking about the gap and that we're seeing. We're gonna have to, that's gonna be work in itself to just define that in a succinct way of what we're thinking the gaps are for our subcommittee as a whole, and then seek their input on why there's the gap, what needs to be done to fill that gap. That's the way I'm seeing these meetings. If others have a different opinion, then yeah, but for those who did put state employees, I'd like to hear, or state implementers, state employee implementers.
I did. I agree about that though. I think that what I really would like to see is maybe those actions that are going to be implemented by those agencies, state agencies that are not in the working groups. We're just emailing it to them and making sure that they're aware of it before it gets put in the plan. That's all. Because I feel weird assigning something to another state agency without them being involved in the process.
Yeah, that's where I think it goes. My opinion is that it goes back to, and sort of has been the guidance from the Climate Action Office, is to make sure that subcommittees as a whole or as task groups, and we've done this in cross-sector mitigation task group meetings, is have state employees come in and say, you were a lead implementer, we're thinking about going this direction, and you will be a lead implementer, and how do you, what's your reaction to that? Or give us some detail of the programs, the program status, the challenges, so that's what we've been doing at the task group level and cross-sector. And I think we kind of need to do that more, maybe at the task group level here too.
Right, but that, what you just said, Andrea, feels better served through sort of direct email communication with those implementation partners rather than pulling them all into an hour meeting and saying, here's what we've got, give us your broad reactions. Does that track? Or
we didn't do it by email in the cross-sector mitigation task groups. We did it through presentations and communications with those state implementers, but yeah, it could be either or, depending on what people feel they have the time for, or the need for greater conversation than an email.
I mean, it could be a meeting, but it doesn't need to be one of these facilitated sessions, is what I'm realizing. Yeah.
So given that, how is everybody feeling about that? And in the next 5 minutes or less, can we come up with the other stakeholder group that we'd like to have?
I'm curious, I don't see any stakeholder groups here. Like, we've sort of, with the municipal support organizations, that feels like a strong recommendation from the community capacity and planning group, but I'm curious if public health or the infrastructure group had ideas about stakeholders to engage. Well, if not,
that last bullet sort of speaks to some of that. Michael had some input there. Other than that, no, I don't think infrastructure in the built environment had much on that. I don't know, Anne, if you had any opinion on that.
I'm just in the middle of adding something in the chat.
No,
so
that's okay. I meant Anne Margolis because she's
on
good.
Okay, good.
Because she's on the infrastructure and built environment, but.
No, I mean, this is maybe along the lines of what Mike was thinking. I mean, we obviously have a utility represented on this subcommittee, and then, and on the task group for infrastructure, and then the department who, thinks about resilience in the electric utility space. But it's, there's 17 different types of utilities that all have different challenges in terms of the types of infrastructure investments that they are able to or motivated to make for different regulatory reasons. So I had suggested having a specific meeting with utilities, but I think that would be more apropos of our specific infrastructure task group. But Mike may have been thinking along the lines of, you know, all of the interdependencies, at least with electric resilience. You know, you have interdependencies with transportation. You need to be able to navigate roads, to repair lines that are down. And, you know, as we electrify transportation, that's dependent on having a pretty rock solid grid. Even, you know, fossil fuels, which we're trying to transition away from with the plan. There's going to be embedded interdependencies with the delivery of sort of fuels for daily life for some time to come, with having both, you know, the grid available for pumping, for example, pumping gas and delivering those fuels. So, you know, and then all of the individuals and other organizations that are dependent on all of those services and goods. So, you know, you could spin this out as far as you want, but I didn't see another particular, you know, group to me. I think what's been sort of tricky for me is just trying to take off my electricity regulatory hat and think about infrastructure more broadly. You know, maybe this is having other, you know, having folks from ANR and DEC and VEM come in to really specifically talk to the infrastructure task group, really trying to figure out some of the areas where we're maybe missing some specific voices. You know, I think at the end of the day, you know, we're presenting priorities on infrastructure, for example, to the Climate Council. And I think what's on everyone's mind is floods and flood resilience. And that's not really where my head is as a person on the you know, as a representative of state government on the infrastructure task group. So there could be, you know, depending on where this rural resilience subcommittee wants to go in terms of prioritizing, you know, our highest recommendations and strategies and actions, it seems like that would help shape, you know, what are the missing voices here? What are the missing perspectives?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It sort of gets back to that definition of resilience and what it means. And it makes me think about the letter that we sent back to the speaker in November or December, when that was, and the sort of the priorities that rose from that. And if I remember right, it is like these 3 different groups of munis, commercial and individuals. I don't even know if commercial was in there, but I feel like that is an important one too. But those are more resilience in the terms of the impacts that we've seen over the last couple of years. So maybe we need to have more talk about that. I feel like there's not enough time. We should just meet all day at some point. Any thoughts?
If we ever get healthy, we need a day-long retreat. There's so much in front of us.
You know.
Well, in absence, I'm sorry, Candace, I joined midway through, but in absence of a clear directive for gathering state employees together, I'm coming back to David's suggestion of the providers to individuals as a second stakeholder group. Even if it's a long list, it seems like we'll probably only get half of them because they're probably very busy. And it's, for me, that was a very articulate, what we want to get out of that group. And it would span all 3 of our task groups in terms of information we would get from them. So a second on that idea.
We haven't talked about, I mean, we kind of hit volunteer response organizations when we talk about this group. Regional navigators, we definitely talked about that. State employees, we talked a lot about. We haven't talked about this group yet. And so I don't want to omit that conversation and figure out, you know, with some of the other input that was provided in both of these bullets, the commercial or businesses, industry, different types of industry that I don't know how much we've heard from So,
I can speak to this because one, I may have just voted for commercial recreation vendors and supporters, but I didn't recall it being stated that way. So I added that bullet as an other. Just feels to me like it is a good group to try and start building relationship and communications with, because I don't think they've been very engaged in the whole, I think I don't think they've been as engaged in the conversation as much as other sectors. So I know that our division has been doing a little work to try and better engage like the downtown organizations. They've been huge resources on the ground, both in flood recovery, but also just in, sort of economic sustainability of downtowns. So that's one group that, we've been trying to engage more, and engaging them more then means that they become sort of potentially an asset to then doing this work, bringing in more people who have, a connection to the work and some capacity to help get this work done. So I added that and wanted to broaden it. The original way that I had recalled seeing it was like kind of focused on, ski industry, maple industry, but I wanted to broaden that out to just sort of economic business groups in general. So not only the big sort of sectors, but also downtown organizations that are really focused on sort of place-based engagement in their community and support in their community as a, community capacity building. So that's why I included that one.
what do folks think about that? And I think we still have on the table sort of building out the list of the muni and individual support groups and seeing where that lands us as far as having one conversation or separate conversations in different formats. So like not to leave them out at all. I think we're pretty clear that we'd like to hear from those types of groups too. So we have to figure out a way to do that if it's not in one of these formal stakeholder groups, but now just giving the commercial business some thought. Marion, go ahead.
Oh yeah, would second that the proposal around sort of the commercial business industry vendors and organizations that work with those. I think as I think about the focus of our subcommittee and sort of rural community resilience, the importance of engaging with the businesses in the industry that really support those rural communities and sort of provide some of that rural identity. And I know there are a number of, I'm thinking too about like where there are actions that we're sort of struggling with how to revise and would like some input on. And I know some of those are really around like how to support the ski industry or other industries in the transition to be more adapted to climate change impacts, or doing sort of climate change vulnerability assessments. What does that look like? What information is needed? And we don't really have that expertise on this task group much. And so, yeah, I think that would be another great group to engage with.
David.
Does this conversation in people's minds encompass the State Chamber of Commerce, local chambers?
Yeah.
Because their business members have all been through these floods, and I am sure they have learned something, and that something ought to be shared. And I'm also thinking about and you touched on it early, Ms. Cook, the logging industry, the construction industry, who are all necessary for creating resilient landscapes. And so does this discussion incorporate them? And it's just a question to the proposers.
Yeah, Chamber of Commerce was definitely on my list down there. So the Chamber of Commerce, downtown orgs, VBSR, specific industry organizations, which could, I hadn't thought about construction organizations,
Yeah.
but I'm sure there's a group that represents construction, and
But the
coalitions.
reason I think of it is that a business for doing work around lakes can get certified as being lake smart. And so if you broaden that out to just resilient smart,
Right.
you're
But
out
I,
of the
but I
gate.
think I want the group again to focus on the actions that are building community capacity, not necessarily prescriptive actions to reduce resilience. So again, just really focused on the capacity. So in the construction industry, what capacity do they need? Or do they, maybe think communities need to help address the things that they're seeing on the ground? But just keep, so outdoor recreation sector, there's groups that represent the outdoor rec sector. There's groups that represent the agricultural sector, forest products and forest service. So yes, I think really trying to expand that sort of economic perspective, leverage the capacity that they might be able to bring by engaging them in this conversation and identifying sort of how, what kind of recommendations we can provide to help build the capacity to do that kind of work and further engage that group. So expanding it basically beyond just the sort of ski and maple industry that was called out in the original climate action plan and the actions.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
Alice, go ahead. We're not gonna get to our task groups, I feel like, but I feel like this is good discussion anyway, so.
Well, that's good because I was going to fall on my sword of I've been really busy. Yes, business support, yes. And I'm looking out for, I'm in a ski resort area. And the ski resorts have huge support from the local Chamber of Commerce and from, they know who to outreach to for issues and problems, and they're doing their own climate change education and research right now also. I'm looking at the small business owners who are really a backbone for residents and also for the skiers who come to visit, because they're the restaurants and the coffee shops and the pharmacy we don't have anymore, and the grocery stores. And I've watched them go out of business. I've seen them be destroyed by flooding. And the effects that, I mean, that's climate change for them. When they go to contact FEMA for support, it's a different reporting stream than it is for residences. So they need support in that. And here, and I'm really watching here in the Valley, how good our Chamber of Commerce is on supporting small business. I mean, and it's their small businesses like our coffee shops and grocery stores that are supplying jobs. Maybe not the highest paying jobs, but they really do support jobs here. And things like a local museum floods. The Chamber of Commerce where it used to be flooded. So I think we really need some conversation here on supporting small businesses. They're also talking about Marshfield and Calais. They're looking at development and moving it up to a higher area in the town. And the wonder is, could they get any kind of business up there? Could they support a Dollar General store up there or a supermarket? And they don't know yet. So the planning and replanning for some of these small rural towns, I think they need help on business support too.
Yeah. So are we landing onto stakeholder groups generally, at least? Okay.
I think so.
Great. I will work with Sophie in the Climate Action Office to try to nail down our next steps on this. I'm going to propose that maybe we have a shared document where we add some names to it so that we can get more specifics. But I'll take Sophie's lead on that and follow up with you all on how we'll do that. Okay. Well, we were going to go into our, I can stop sharing now somehow, and where I have a button for that. Our task group discussion, and I think we still should. But two of our three task leads are not here, not to say that others couldn't provide an update. But maybe we can also talk more generally, a little bit more maybe about housing that was brought up last time and we didn't really get to dig into, or some of the broader themes, or what we think about resilience, just sort of the bigger picture things, or how what we're doing. We had some conversations in our task group, infrastructure task group, about revisiting some of the work that's already been done, like the memo that was sent to the speaker in late last year, and just sort of kind of starting to think about what is out there and what's going to guide our work and our prioritization of our work. So I guess I'll open it up to that, and then if there's any specifics that come out of task group work, or things that it's folks that are in those task groups feel it's important for the others to understand, that would be great too. And I have to step away for like 30 seconds, so I'll be right back, but carry on, please.
Well, as former co-chair, Alice, go.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Yeah, I guess I've been busy. As I said, I'm working on the CVRPC regional plan rewrite for Washington County and parts of Orange County. And coming up is our housing chapter our housing chapter review. So I was kind of tweaked by Ben Rose's talking about bringing up the housing issue as part of a climate change discussion. So I called Ben and I met up with him and had a conversation with him to clarify for me what he's talking about, like what are his concerns and issues about housing. And we talked a lot about what he was talking about was that when we are building and we know the numbers that the state needs, and that's all going to get looked at in municipalities and in the regional plans for who needs what housing numbers where. He's saying that we need to look at that when we're building resilient and sustainable homes that are going to last, and that what people want to live in and live in healthy. We need to look at where we're building and where we should not be building. And he does feel that the state has the ability to do some regulatory statutes to help move this forward. So in other words, like for public health, we always started looking at the issues of mold and inefficient insulated homes, like, too cold, too hot, looking at existing housing that people want to stay in and improve it. We're looking at that. And
what is he suggesting that this group do? should we incorporate something in a published piece that, or what is he suggesting?
What I think, and I wish he was still here to speak to it more. What I think and what I'm actually looking at now is one, adding these housing issues into the public health pathways. Like, how can public health help this? I think you're going to look at adding this into infrastructure task force.
I think it falls into that when we were talking earlier about the breakup of assignments on the actions, and I think we decided that, if I remember, these building ones were kind of more related, or were going to be taken on by community and capacity. Not that they're necessarily only related to them, because I think it's one of those cross-cutting things. But what does that mean for action? That maybe there's some actions that pertain to the public health side of that, and some actions that pertain
Right.
to the zoning or planning or those types of things. And so I wonder if the community capacity group has had an opportunity to dig into that at all yet, and what kind of conversations are happening with that. No, not yet.
I brought these issues to our staff at CVRPC, who is drafting our particular chapters for the regional plan. And I got a good response. They've already been looking at these issues about
To
where
whom
to,
are they speaking?
yeah. So,
Is there expertise in this field that we should be tapping?
yes, but I haven't gotten there yet. I haven't been able to identify that yet. Bronwyn?
Bronwyn.
Yeah.
So, backing up, I will clarify and create this baseline that basically all of the housing actions that are in the climate action plan came from the Department of Housing and Community Development. And it was our way of trying to elevate and connect the work that the climate action plan was charged with doing and the work that our division has been trying to support, and really trying to help make it clear that we, cannot address these things in silos, that they're just very connected. So all of the actions, pretty much, I think all of the actions that are existing come from what our agency has identified as priorities or things that are moving forward in the housing world. There, are probably good thoughts and recommendations coming from other folks around housing. So Alice, maybe you're speaking to some of that. And maybe there's more appetite to bring some other thinking around housing in, but I'll just, for the existing actions, I was anticipating having to take on that work because I'm the most familiar in the subcommittee. And we were the ones that drafted those actions in the original climate action plan. So my approach was to take a first stab at those actions that are in there, try and provide some additional clarity around, how does this actually advance climate action? How does it increase community capacity? How does it relate to health? How are these actions that the Department of Housing and Community Development already supporting connect to climate work? So that would be my just baseline setting, what I would say about that.
I could give you a concrete example. There is here in the Valley a reasonable developer, local, who would like to put in 20 or so houses, duplexes, in an area that makes sense. It's a sensible area to build. Some people will have some issues, and they may not be able to put in 20. It may be a reduced number. But what he's saying is that he can address your regular buyers and also low-income housing in this, that there would be a specific area or number of low-income he would reserve for low-income housing. And he's talking about working with this still, I don't get it, this unidentified terrific modular home builder that only builds quality stuff. These are going to be great, okay? So my immediate question is, what does he mean by that? Should there be some review of this high-end modular builder and the quality and the issues of energy efficiency? Any kind of, what we look at is finding that a number of these modular homes or fabricated homes do wind up with issues of mold and leaks, etc. So there was one full ADU type development that happened over in Western Vermont, Madison County, I think, where it was a great idea. They were well-priced homes, but the residents that bought them immediately had problems with them, mold, leaks, foundation issues, etc. And these were modular built homes. So I think that's
Where does that leave us?
So
Alice?
can I interrupt really quick? So Alice, it sounds to me like what you're referring to is, and this is not the only issue, but new construction, mobile homes, new construction, what are codes? And I would say that that's mostly addressed in building code, health code, fire safety code, all of those, which if I recall correctly is being addressed in cross-sector mitigation with advice from us that if you are opening up and talking about codes, it should also consider resilience in building code, which is separate from location of mobile homes, which again, I think we have some recommendations about siting and new development in such a, to make sure that the location is safe. It's the location and the building. So those are both things that I can review our existing actions to make sure that that's clear, you know, where and how those are being addressed. Again, making it clear that those building code issues is going to be coming up in cross-sector mitigation. Yes, cross-sector mitigation.
And that's kind of where we're at, David. It's just, this came up, it's out there, and it needs discussion. So
Yeah,
I'm just,
all I'm trying to do is push to the end point, Alice.
yeah, I get you.
What do we need to do?
Yeah. Great.
And I understand it's a work in process and we'll keep working on it.
Yeah, no problem. I think, you know, what you're saying is appropriate and necessary to what we do. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we are going to pause for a second here and open it up to public comment if there is anyone from the public or that wants to make a comment. So leave a little space for that. Okay. The only other thing to do, I think, for now, besides talk a whole bunch more, is to kind of recap where we're at. And what I wrote down was that our task groups obviously need to keep on the work and looking at revising and filling the gaps. So looking at the actions and keep meeting and talk to implementers. Invite them to your meetings with a specific purpose and topic of conversation, or if it's pretty limited, reach out to them via email and hope to get feedback that way on specific actions. I will correspond with Sophie on the stakeholder groups and look to get a more direct path on how we will refine the list of people that we want. I have a thought in mind on adding a document to the SharePoint and creating that, but I don't know if that's what Sophie has envisioned. So I want to just check in with her on that and I'll loop back with you all on that. In the meantime, I think David and Ann Lawless, you both said that you could work to generate a list of those organizations that you were talking about that support more individuals and work on the ground. So
We should
if you want to
send
do
it to
that and
you.
bring that back, we can bring that back to the group also.
We should send it to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. That's all I had for next steps. Is there anything that you think I missed? That's important as we move on. Probably need to talk about when we want to meet again. Although I do think there's going to be a need for some sort of organization and correspondence on helping to define the content of our stakeholder meetings. And that's going to have to happen in the next couple of weeks if we're going to be having meetings towards the end of October or early November. So I don't know, what do you think about a cadence for the next meeting?
I'd propose, Andrea, that we pick a scheduled time to meet and set that as an ongoing cadence as opposed to trying to schedule each.
It kind of has been that, but we were at monthly, and I think monthly is too long, to be honest. But if folks feel like monthly is where we should be, then we can look to meet again at the end of October, but there may be a need to provide input in some manner before then. And just with our processes for being transparent and open, I'm a little challenged in doing that on a monthly basis. But so I guess the question is, what do other folks feel about meeting more frequently than monthly? I'm happy to get the rest of the meetings on, but I do feel like monthly is a little difficult.
Well, I would
But
want to
happy
get my
to
force
meet
together
monthly. That's what I'm doing.
first.
Sorry, Alice, go ahead.
I'd like to get my task force together again first. And
Definitely.
there may be what I call the subcommittee, the subcommittee group or of individuals that also meet besides the full task force every once in a while. When we kind of run with something and bring it back to the task force. So I'd like to do that first. If you're looking in October, there could be the October 11th and 25th. Those are 2 Fridays. That would make it 2 meetings in October. I could do that. But I'm speaking for myself here.
Yeah, what do others think about monthly versus something more frequent?
We're still looking at December for turning our work product in.
Yep.
I'm game.
You know, I mean, for the work product, to me, that means having a nice filled out template, those spreadsheets, not creating the narrative portion of the plan.
Right.
That's my understanding. And prioritizing as a subgroup, so I'm a subcommittee.
So once. Doesn't the council want that? The templates?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, by the end of the year.
Andrea, I would propose 2 meetings in October just because we have the stakeholder meetings at the end of October, beginning of November. And I think we need to pick dates for those soon, don't we?
Yes.
So you could always schedule meetings bi-weekly and cancel if there's not a need, but I think better to have them on the calendar.
Yeah.
Would be my suggestion.
Okay, definitely will take suggestions on agenda topics. I have an extremely busy October. Like, I don't know what happened, but it's like the outreach month. Maybe it is for everybody else too.
Yeah, I'm busy working on my Halloween costume.
Great. Can't wait to see it. So we'll go with the 11th is 12 to 2 work for people, and then also on the 25th. What's that?
I'll be late on the 25th, but I'll be here.
Yeah. There is a possibility that we will have another co-chair, but we'll see how that works. The 11th would be nice to take off, but
12 noon again.
yeah, noon to 2. We'll look for that. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Okay,
Bye.
Bye.
that was a good meeting.